Senator Miville-Dechêne on debate. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dear colleagues.
In support of Bill 243, as introduced by my colleague Senator Rosa Galvez. The Climate-Aligned Finance Act is a courageous and coherent bill. I spent most of my career working as a reporter. I was a Washington correspondent. One of the most famous mantras in journalism is, follow the money. What this means, of course, is that by following financial transaction, one can get to the source of the problem. The phrase was coined at the time of the Watergate scandal. Of course, the bill before us seeks to address very different problems. In some ways, they are less spectacular. They get less media attention. But the problem of climate change is much more serious, and it threatens the entire planet. Bill S-243 aims to connect our financial system and our climate commitments to get to the source of the problem and start fixing it. It will not be easy. Nobody said it would be. We should not expect to change the rules of our financial systems, as we must, while preserving the status quo of business as usual. We have to choose. Je ne suis pas une scientifique.
I'm not a scientist, so I won't spend a lot of time presenting climate change scenarios and energy trajectories. In any case, that's not our job as legislators. Our job is to take the science into account and legislate accordingly, in this case for the good of the planet and the next generations of Canadians. So what are the scientists saying? The latest IPCC report, released just a few weeks ago, concludes with these words, and I quote, "The cumulative scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and global health. Any further delay in comprehensive and proactive action on adaptation and mitigation will cause us to miss a rapidly closing window of opportunity to ensure a viable and sustainable future for all." So, what should we do? The IPCC report does not offer detailed solutions, but it clearly identifies the problem of insufficient and misaligned financing and the need to adopt a model where, and I quote, investments are aligned with climate-resilient development.
Are also pointing the way. In February of last year, the UK government published a major study on the economics of biodiversity, led by Professor Das Gupta of Cambridge University. The review does not mince words. Collectively, we have failed to manage our global portfolio of assets sustainability. Estimates show that between 1992 and 2014, produced capital per person doubled, and human capital per person increased by about 13%, but the stock of natural capital per person declined by nearly 40%. In other words, while humanity has prospered immensely in recent decades, the ways in which we have achieved such prosperity means that it has come at a devastating cost to nature. But this is not simply a market failure. It's a broader institutional failure too. Governments almost everywhere exacerbate the problem by paying people more to exploit nature than to protect it, and to prioritize unsustainable economic activities. We need a financial system that channels financial investments, public and private, towards economic activity that enhance our stock of natural assets and encourage sustainable consumption and production activities." End of quote. In May of last year, the International Energy Agency published a pathway to net zero emission by 2050, a goal that Canada has publicly committed to achieve. The report was very direct and precise in saying that no new oil and gas field should be approved for development beyond those already approved in 2021, and that, going forward, the only focus of oil and gas producers should be to manage and reduce emissions from existing assets. There are many more reports and studies, of course, but at this point, the message is clear. If we are to reach net zero by 2050, we need transformational change and at a systemic level quickly. But that is not what we have done in Canada. So far, we have supported a few climate policies and initiatives, as long as they do not affect our economy in any meaningful way. We vow to protect the climate in the long term, but short-term consideration of competitiveness takes precedence. We advocate for bold change, but the status quo prevails most of the time. And so, as we pledge to reduce our national emissions, we are planning to increase our oil and gas exports. We celebrate our carbon tax, but our biggest polluters only pay a fraction of it. And the most significant measure we are contemplating for the financial industry is a disclosure scheme. I strongly believe in transparency, of course. It is often an essential first step. In fact, we just passed Bill S-243, which is a transparency bill focused on forced labor and child labor in supply chains. But there are situations where transparency alone is not sufficient, especially when economic incentives are not aligned. In the case of the financial sectors, climate disclosure schemes have not had much impact. A recent report by NGOs shows that in 2021, the world top banks provided $752 billion in finance to the fossil fuel industry. 1/4 of that amount went to companies that are expanding production. In Canada, financing for oil sands operation increased by 51%. Of course, this is not because we didn't know about climate change last year, or because we had insufficient disclosures to know that increasing oil and gas production contradicts our climate commitments. It's because disclosures are basically worthless if they are not associated with cost. In fact, a 2020 survey by HSBC Bank found that just 10% of investors viewed the climate disclosures as a relevant source of information. When discussing that survey, the Financial Times quote a former Bank of England economist as saying that, and I quote, "Just discussing risks and assessing risks does not mean we are actually transitioning to net zero. Many firms may discuss risks and do exactly nothing to advance the transition," end of quote. And why is that? Because climate disclosure provide information, but they do not align financial incentives. And that's what matters, alignment.
Today, we have before us Bill S-243. For the first time, a bill that proposes to do what the IPCC and others have been calling for, to align finance with our climate commitments. The legislation would require financial institutions, public and private, to describe how they align their loans and investments with our climate commitments. It would require financial institutions to integrate climate expertise at the highest level. It would favor financial transactions that accelerate the transition and disfavor those that slow it. It also addresses the conflicts of interest that have slowed us down for so many years. This bill was drafted over several months in consultation. Rather, it is a bold and necessary bill that challenges the paradigm under which we have operated until now, where the financial system is deemed untouchable. There will certainly be opposition to this bill, but I think the criticism should be met with a simple question. If you don't agree with this legislation, what do you propose to do to bring Canada's financial system in line with our climate commitments? If the answer is simply to propose more disclosure and carbon capture, or to say that we need to wait for other countries to act, or that the market will make the transition on its own, then we will know that there is no real will to change anything.
As I mentioned at the outset, Bill S-243 proposes to follow the money. That is certainly the right approach. But there is another thing that Bill S-243 would allow us to do, and that is putting our money where our mouth is. Senator Galvez is giving us an opportunity not only to align our financial system with our climate commitments, but to align our deeds with our words. We want to be climate leaders, but we are the only G7 country where emissions increased between 2015 and 2019. We point to other countries with bigger carbon footprints, but Canada is the worst country in the world for cumulative emissions per population. We can and should be doing much better. As senator, we often say that one of our duties is to provide representation to underrepresented groups. Today, I suggest to you that one such group is made up of future generations. The bill is for them. As appointed legislature, we are protected from electoral pressures. In politics, this is rare and an invaluable privilege. It should give us the courage and the independence to make hard decisions that are in the public interest. Today, I suggest that we should take the time to understand and reflect on this bill. To quote the Dasgupta review one last time, quote, "The same ingenuity that has led us to make demands on nature that are so large, so damaging, and over such a short period can be redeployed to bring about transformative change, perhaps even in just as short of a time. We and our descendants deserve nothing less. In 15 or 20 years, most of us won't be here anymore. Today, I suggest that this bill gives us a chance to do something that will matter when we are gone. So I urge you, colleagues, to send this bill to committee for an in-depth study without delay. We owe this to our children and grandchildren." Merci.